idolatry was rightly associated with demons and demonic influence. It's another reason God hates it so much. Now, a biblical idol may indeed be nothing more than a lifeless piece of wood, but lifeless and harmless are two different things. A pill is lifeless, but if you read the list of potential side effects that come with your prescription, you'll understand it's not harmless. There is a big difference between lifeless and harmless. Likewise, an idol is an inanimate object, but it's also a bridge to and from Satan. It opens your mind to the evil rulers and authorities of this world, as Ephesians 6:12 says. So God hates idolatry because it's dumb, but he also hates it because it is demonic. But here's another thing that I think we have to take into account. I think God hates idolatry because it seems to be progressive. It's rare, if ever, that you find a reference to just one idol in Scriptures. In fact, 4 out of 5 times the word idol appears in Scriptures, it's plural. It's idols. For example, Rachel didn't have an idol in her possession. She had a sack full of them. Hundreds of years later in the New Testament, when Paul entered the most educated city in the world, the most proud, knowledgeable city in the world at the time, Athens. Acts 17:16 says Paul was deeply troubled by all the idols he saw everywhere in the city. They were right out in the open. And so, if you believe in even one false god, it's likely you're going to have many idols in your collection. It just wouldn't make sense to risk angering a god by excluding him from your worship rituals. So during the time of Paul in Athens, the Romans, the Greeks, they had many gods, many gods. They had a whole pantheon of gods. They had a building with a god on every shelf. And if you're going to believe in any kind of inanimate god, you can't risk offending the other gods. And so they just took them all on as being their idols. And that's why when Jesus resurrected from the dead and the Christians wanted to start a group around the death of Jesus called the Way, later called Christians, the Romans said, sure, come on, bring him in. He's one of many. He's one of many. Put him on the shelf with the other gods because it was so progressive. Idols themselves are so progressive. And if you're in Solomon's case, it wouldn't make sense to risk angering one of your 700 wives by not including her idol of worship among the others. Men, do you understand what I'm saying? You made a god for her. Where's my God? God hates idolatry because it's progressive. It's also contagious. Moses warned the Israelites that it's contagious in Deuteronomy chapter 7. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you're about to enter and occupy, he will clear away many nations ahead of you. These 7 nations are greater and more numerous than you. And when he hands these nations over to you and you conquer them, you must completely destroy them. Make no treaties with them and show them no mercy. You must not intermarry with them, Solomon did. Do not let your daughters and sons marry their sons and daughters. They did. For they will lead your children away from me to worship other gods. There was the whole reason. The whole reason for no intermarriage. There's the whole reason. They'll lead you away to worship other gods. And it is exactly what happened. And there are several biblical evidences that idolatry was contagious that way. I mean, one is, we talked about already, the speed by which the golden calf idea spread through the Israelites' camp at Mount Sinai in Exodus 32. Somebody thought of it, and suddenly others were chanting it, and now people were demanding it, and then, they throw all this stuff in the fire and just, whoop, out it comes. Finally, Solomon's idolatry led to idolatry among the people. It wasn't just his own. He's the king. He's the spiritual leader of the day among the people. And so the people saw shrines to pagan gods being constructed on the hills around Jerusalem, and they knew the king was championing a more, shall we say, diverse approach to spirituality. A more diverse approach. The only surprise would have been, really, if they hadn't have gotten sucked into the practice of idolatry. So when Elijah stepped to center stage after Solomon's reign ended, he found one of the biggest challenges to be idolatry among the people, in particular with the idol Baal. So that brings to my favorite Old Testament story. It really is. Elijah and the false prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel is my favorite Old Testament story. But Baal worship was very common by that time among the Israelite people. Any one of these reasons would be enough for God to hate idolatry. Add them all together, and you can begin to understand why the Bible refers to idols and idol worship as with such words as detestable, vile, loathsome, defiling, a disgrace. And perhaps you can better understand why God came down so hard early on his people after the golden calf episode. The Israelites were just getting started at Mount Sinai with their march to the promised land, with their grand adventure. And they were going to be facing a land that was filled with false gods and graven images. And God had to take a hard stand against idolatry at that very moment. In the same way you parents, any of you who have been parents, have to take a strong stand against your child the first time they look in your face and say, "No!" And if you don't, you'll pay the price later on. So how do we apply this to us today? Well, that's where the rubber meets the road, and sometimes it can become a little difficult. Several years ago, a family visited our church for the first time. They hung around after the service, man, his wife, and I think it was 3 kids, younger children. They hung around after the service in the hallway. I could tell they were hanging around and kind of talked probably to me. And after some other people got out of the way, the head of the household made his way over to me, and he said, "I'm very upset with here today. I doubt we will ever come back again." He said that our church was guilty of idolatry. And if we hope to escape the fires of hell, we had better repent. Well, that caught my attention. And so I said, "What precisely have we done?" And he said, "Well, you have a picture, you have a cross on top of your steeple outside. And there it is. It's very, very small. You have to be looking at it to know that it's there. It's very, very small." And I said, "Well, I didn't do it, first of all, but I can guarantee you." He then said, "It's obvious you people are more about the cross than you are about Christ." And I said, "Well, I think you're making a judgment against our people. That I know our people, and I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's true." I said, I can pretty confidently tell you that I, for a long time, didn't even know that a cross was there. And people who worship here don't think about it, and I've never heard it brought up before until you just brought it up. And he would have none of it. He became absolutely agitated as he brought up the golden calf and started talking about graven images and God's punishment and how a cross is an example of an idol that people have, and people shouldn't wear crosses as necklaces or bracelets, and that because it is similar to idols that they had in the Old Testament. And he was serious as a heart attack. I mean, he was. He meant it. And I couldn't help, we were probably a 20-minute conversation at least, And I couldn't help but think while he was talking about that scene from a movie that I've seen many, many times, Cool Hand Luke, starring Paul Newman, in which he is driving down the road in his 1956 Chevrolet and he's singing, "I don't care if it rains or freezes as long as I've got my plastic Jesus." And it's a little icon, I guess you would say, a little plastic Jesus that's on his dashboard. And I thought, sometimes I'll see cars still today. I see one here every now and then that has a little plastic Jesus or a little plastic Mary or something material that somebody can look at that to them represents God. That's the human tendency, because we always want to have something we can see or touch or feel. That's my answer to the question I gave you early on. Why do you think this was such an important issue? Well, because God understood that having something for people to see, to touch, to hold, to feel could be a temptation for them to actually worship when they couldn't actually see God, because nobody can see God. I think that's part of the human tendency. It's kind of like the little boy I heard about one time who was sleeping at home at night in his bed, and a big roar of thunder burst out, and he called out, "Daddy, Daddy, I'm afraid. Come here, sleep with me." And his daddy said from the other room, "Son, you're okay? Don't you know God's in there with you? Don't be afraid, just go to sleep." And he said, "Daddy, I want somebody with some skin on." That's one of the attractions of idolatry. It's somebody not with skin, but they got something on. They've been made of something. We all want something with some skin on, something we can see and touch, and that's the danger of material idolatry. Now, the problem with any kind of material that we use to represent God is that there is nothing that has ever been created on this planet that can capture the greatness of the character of God. There's just not. But I want you to think in this light along two words, okay? Reminder and representative. Let me try to explain it or illustrate it with these two words. Suppose you're a husband and you and your wife go to some dinner party where everybody's standing around before dinner, and they're talking and chatting, and there are some people there you don't know, and as you're standing there, a really beautiful woman walks by, and your wife looks at her and says, "Wow, she's beautiful." What are you supposed to say, husband? I didn't notice. Is it a trap, you're thinking in your mind? What are you supposed to say? So you say to your wife, "Yes, dear, she is beautiful. In fact, she reminds me a lot of you." That's pretty good. Some of you should file that away. You might actually get brownie points for that. So that's a reminder. Okay? Scenario number two. Later on that evening, your wife is walking down the hall of that same house with the party, and she opens a closet door, and there you are in the arms of that beautiful woman in an embrace, kissing her. And your wife says, "Sir, explain yourself." And you say, "No problem, honey. I just want you to know that even though it looks like I'm kissing her, she's just representing you. That's all she is. She's just representing you." Now, if any of you believe that, I've got some ocean property over there near Jack in Immokalee for sale for you just today. There's a difference between a reminder and a representative or a representation. There is a tremendous difference between something that reminds us of God and something that to us represents God. And I could think of all kinds of them. I don't think about them just as I come to the church building. I think of them out in society. There are all kinds of things that remind me of God. There is nothing that I see, including a cross, that is representative to me of God. And I personally think we're barking up the wrong tree when we try to make the first and second commandments about crosses or Christian art or pictures that can be reminders or representations. I think Satan would love for us to make the first two commandments about art so we could miss the deeper, more critical truths of the reality of what an idol does to us. Because the truth of the matter is, idolatry can be committed without any physical object being involved. You don't have to have a little wooden shrine or a pantheon of idols sitting on shelves without any physical representation being involved. Ananias and Sapphira, for example, appear to have made status their god. Remember when they lied to make themselves appear more generous than they really were? Some believe that Ananias was jockeying for position on the leadership team of the early church and talked his wife into playing along with a little scam that would make them look super spiritual and really great at giving. Yeah, no actual idol there other than greed. Or how about Samson? Who can deny that his God was pleasure? The man had a weakness for women like fish have a weakness for water. He really did. He also ate and drank outside the parameters of the Nazirite vow that he had taken. In today's world, he would probably be a serial adulterer or a porn addict or both, and almost certainly an alcoholic with the availability. Clearly, a man's God can be just about anything from a carved statue to a long-held belief or devotion, a relationship, a lifestyle. These can all be idols. An idol, in its easiest definition, is anything that competes with God for first place in our life. So let me tell you where we're really up against it in 2025. And this is only a personal opinion, but I'm 70 years old and I've seen a few things. I'm not sure that I have seen a more likely physical object become idol-like in my lifetime than technology. And in particular, the phone, the cell phone. A couple of instances, just to give you an example. Last year at Barbara B. Mann, I was at a presentation of Les Mis, and it was wonderful. And we were down on the 5th row, and during the intermission, I just wanted to stretch my legs and walked around. And I walked around to the, what do they call the center where all the orchestra sits? The orchestra pit. That's what they call it, wouldn't it? So I walked and just killing time. And I looked down in the orchestra pit, and there were about 18 to 20 of the players that are still there in their seat in the orchestra pit. And the others have gone to the bathroom or to get a drink or whatever, I guess. And I started counting. All 18 of them were on their phones. 18 for 18. I'd say represents a potential idol. And a few months before that, I'd taken my two sons over to Miami to a baseball game in the Marlins' new park, and we sat there and we were surrounded by about 18 or 20 people who had paid pretty good money to go watch this professional sport. And I looked around, and all of a sudden, and I nudged my sons, and I said, I only see one person of these 20 or 25 people around us who are not on their phone. You've paid money to go to a baseball game, and you're not watching the game, you're watching your phone. You could do that for free at home. It was sort of amazing to me how in such a short period of time, this little piece of technology has become a bit of an idol to us. I mean, a man whose God is sexual pleasure can access all the idolatry he wants for free with 2 or 3 clicks and never leaving the house. Shopaholics can visit any store and buy any product at any hour of the day without leaving the house, just with their phone. Sports addicts now can choose from an array of gambling sites. It's going to be one of the next big issues that comes, is gambling addiction. Could wind up getting up close to alcohol or drug addiction because of the availability now. If you wanted to gamble, you had to go to Las Vegas. You had to go to Atlantic City. Now, you can sit at home on your phone, gamble it away. Egomaniacs can promote themselves on YouTube and an ever-growing number of social media sites. Here's all I'm saying. Never in history have there ever been so many ways for obsessive people to indulge their fantasies and addictions. To the point where I sometimes wonder if the technology itself hasn't become a god, or at a minimum, an idol. What troubles me is that there are people who simply cannot put their devices down. It's like they're afraid their hand is going to burn off if they lay their phone down. They don't put it down while they're driving. They don't put it down while they're having dinner with their family. They don't put it down even when they're in church. We have people who attend our church who wear their Bluetooth earpieces during the service. You know as well as I do, it's not at all uncommon, it happens almost every week, that we hear a cell phone ring during the service. I never bring my phone into the church building. I am not that important that somebody just has to get in touch with me during the hour that I am worshiping God. I never bring my phone into the church building. I don't bring my phone into meetings. If people come to see me for counseling, my phone is not there in the meeting. I go to a meeting with you somewhere about something important that particularly if I'm asking you for something, and occasionally I've had to go to people and ask for money, I never take my phone. Because I know what they're thinking. Are you really here to see me? Or are you distracted? In situations like all these that I've mentioned in the last few minutes, I think it's fair to ask who or what is being worshiped. The bottom line here is that idolatry is all around us. And our American idols may be harder to recognize than the worship of some stone idol, but they also are way harder to correct and to stop, because they are styles and attitudes and lifestyles that get to us and become progressive, and they have the potential of corrupting and devastating us just as they did the Israelites in these stories we've read today in the wilderness of Sinai. Isn't idolatry really the string that kind of runs through all our sins? When Solomon made his treaty with the Egyptian Pharaoh and did the first deal and received the man's daughter as a part of the deal as his wife, I'm pretty sure he didn't think of it as an act of idolatry. But what else would you call it? He put political expediency ahead of doing what was right and what God had told him to do. The point simply is we can't guard against idolatry if we're blind to it. We have to understand that it can be hiding in almost every temptation we face. And that's why we simply must guard our heart as Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. How do you guard your heart against idolatry? By making sure God is a part of everything you do. Everything you do flows from it. Think about it. When we see Solomon at the height of his idolatrous lifestyle, marrying and buying and indulging like an out-of-control sailor on a weekend pass, what does he say over and over and over again? Well, go read in the first few chapters of the book of Ecclesiastes, and you will see that about a dozen times he said, I said to myself. I said to myself. He didn't say, I said to God. He said, I said to myself. Well, you know what? I can talk myself into just about anything. I know. I've done it. But if I talk to God and I said to God, well, maybe that won't be quite as easy for me to do. Jesus said, no one can serve two masters. Either you hate one and love the other, or you be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and man. You simply can't. God doesn't want to be number one on your list of 6 or 7. He wants to be number one on your list of 1. Between number 1 and number 2 is a huge leap. But the step between number 2 to number 10 or number 50 or number 500 is a relatively small step, because number 1 speaks of singularity and 2 or any other number speaks of plurality. And I'll close by demonstrating that this way. What if when my wife came in this morning for worship, I said, Diana, I want you to know that you are my number 1 wife. Number 2 is this lady over here. And number 3 is that lady over there. No, that wouldn't work out very well, would it? It's like the difference between having 1 wife and 2 is a huge, huge leap, but a step between having 2 wives and 700, like Solomon, is a baby step. It's the difference between exclusivity. And God says, I want to be exclusive. There should be no other gods before you.